Okay, Jim. I know I mentioned it in the last episode of Continuing Conversations, but today we're going to start out talking about what I think is one of the hottest trilogies out there right now. It's Star Trek Coda. Before we go in that, though, for people who are just joining us in this show, we want to introduce and invite you to Continuing Conversations. It's a podcast about Star Trek Adventures, RPG. And the purpose of this podcast is to talk about everything Star Trek Adventures. It includes latest releases, professionals, fans, game rules, mechanics, how to be a better GM, how to be a better player, discussing the wider Star Trek universe in relation to STA, which is why I mentioned Star Trek Coda today, answering your questions about the best RPG ever. I'm Michael Dismuke, freelance writer for the Star Trek Adventures RPG. I'm a contributor to Continuing Missions, the #1 fan site for the Star Trek Adventures game and Your Average Geek. And today we are here with the very friendly, very well-connected Jim Johnson. He's a writer, gamer, Star Trek Adventures project manager, popcorn lover, daddy, and cat minion. All right, Jim, where are you at with the Coda trilogy?
I have to admit that I'm a little jealous of you that you're already either into book 2 or almost done with book 2, if I'm not mistaken. But I am like 70% of the way through book 1, and I'm chugging my way through it, and I just haven't had the time in the last week or so to finish it because I've got book 2. I pre-ordered all 3 of them, and so book 2 is on my Kindle ready to go, and I've just got to finish book 1 first, obviously, and super excited.
Yeah, I've been blessed to have to drive a lot in the car recently. So I wisely had ordered the Audibles. And so I've been listening to them. So for those of you who don't know, it's a trilogy. The first one is Moments Asunder by Dayton Ward. If you don't know him, New York Times bestseller. He's been writing for 20 years. Ashes of Tomorrow, James Swallow, another well-known Trek writer. And Oblivion's Gate by David Mack, writer not only of Star Trek, but all kinds of other cool IPs. What does this have to do with Star Trek RPG? Many people might be wondering. Well, one of the reasons we're highlighting our podcast is the Game Master's Guide and the Player's Guide is because we understand that a lot of people are hesitant to get into the game because of so much canon. The novels are 20 years of story and Star Trek and background on characters that continued after the TV show. And for me, I remember how intimidated I was to get into the novels because of that fact, because I started about 5 years ago on the novels, if you can believe that. With that said, what I learned and what I like about these trilogies, it's kind of putting the bow on the last 20 years. It's wrapping that up. And my heart is breaking and I'm choking up reading the second book because of the stories in there. As an RPG player, I'm, of course, trying to figure out how do I take the best of that and convert it into the game. And Star Trek Adventures RPG gives you the license to do that, which is really cool. What's your take on that, Jim? How do you pull in the best stories, or if you see something cool in a novel, what's your take on bringing that into your RPG game? What advice do you have for people?
Do it. I mean, if you see something cool in a book or a novel or a nonfiction resource for Star Trek, anything, I mean, I would tell this to writers of any kind of fiction, just fill your brain with ideas and read everything and just, cherry pick the stuff that looks cool and fit it into your game somewhere. Like you said, there is like the last 20 years of Star Trek novels are fairly well interwoven, beta canon wise, but there's another 20 years of novels before that were just like standalones, right? Because they had the original series and Next Gen and TNG and DS9 and all these other novels that for the most part weren't connected to each other, but they were just part of the series and tied into the series. And then it was like somewhere in the late, I know it must have been the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, they really started to make more of an effort to tie all the new different novel series together and have kind of like a continuing through lines happening. And that's just a wealth of potential information to drop into your games. Like the novels have been consistently, if not great, good for so long now that like like a lot. There's a whole generation of Star Trek fans right now that know the novels really, really well and can pull all that content into their games if they want to. I mean, even to some extent, I think the producers of Discovery have cherry picked certain elements out of the novels, which doesn't surprise me, of course, because Kirsten Beyer is one of the producers of Discovery, and she wrote a bunch of novels.
Yeah. Voyager novels. And to that point, this is why I wanted to talk about that. When you say that, Jim, I think the average person who maybe wants to get into Star Trek RPG for the first time may feel a little intimidated. And I want to tell them, don't, because your story is your story. You're creating the best story for your group. And if you come across a conflict in a comic, in a movie, in a TV show, or reading the novels, don't worry about it. Your game is your game, and just take the best of the best. I really wish I could give spoilers about the books, but I hate spoilers. I'm the kind who doesn't. I don't watch trailers for movies because of that. So once it's all out and it's out there in the ether a little bit more, then I'm dying to talk about some of the highlights of the books. But the reason I brought this up for today's show is because we're talking about eras of play and styles of play with Star Trek. It's the GM Chapter 3. And I think it's relevant that I brought in that whole canon and beta canon conversation, because when you're building your world, these are the things you get to consider, you and your players, about what does your world look like? What did you pull from all these different elements, right?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, cool. So again, that's why the chapter is important. This is chapter 3 of the Game Master's Guide that we're going over today. And we're going to go over the 2 sections, which is eras of play, styles of play, why these are important. So let's go ahead and start with eras of play. Love this chapter as a primer for the players. Talk to us, Jim, about what it does.
Yeah, for sure. So first, I want to just say that this is the last chapter in both books that covers kind of the same ground, right? So like chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3 of both the Player's Guide and the Game Master's Guide cover the same topics, even though they're from 2 different directions, right? So obviously the Player's Guide is focused on the players and like what you can do with that information from a player perspective. And then the Game Master Guide takes the same headings, the same same basic content, but orients it entirely toward the Game Master, right? And so with the Eras of Play chapter, what I wanted to do is like, if you look at Star Trek as a franchise, like on film anyway, it covers about 1,000 years, right, give or take, from like 2063 all the way to the 3100s in Discovery season 3 and season 4. And so we took that. I took that massive, chunk of time where it's likely the vast majority of Star Trek Adventures campaigns are probably going to be set, just because that's what we know, right? That's what we see on screen. That's what we're familiar with. Although I'm sure there'll be a group that will prove me wrong. And what I did is I took that 1,000 odd years and I chunked it out into 6 really broad eras of play, right? Kind of like based around series to some extent, based around key events, etc. And then we take each of those 6 big eras of play and then just give you a ton of information about what's happening in that era, who are your likely antagonists, what's happening with the Federation, and just to give players and game masters an opportunity to look at this enormous timeline of Star Trek stuff and say, where do we want to play our game? Because where you pick in the timeline is going to impact how your characters think and what your values are, and it'll impact what the game master can throw at you, generally speaking, right? Like, I mean, of course you can go off the rails if you want to, but like we're trying to set a baseline here.
Right, and let's do that. Let's give them a highlight again. We're not going to read the whole book to you, but if you are listening to this or watching this, we want to let you know about the eras that you can choose if you want a lot of good canon material, stuff on TV to watch to back it up and give you a feel. Again, as Jim said, you can squeeze your timeline before, in between these eras, or after these eras. So let's start with the foundational years. This would be 2063 through 2199. I love one of the subheadings. It's been a long road. And anyone who knows why that song gets to that era. So Jim, what era is covered during the foundational years? What TV shows, I should say, cover that?
Yeah, I mean, the primary one is Enterprise. You got a little bit of Star Trek First Contact, because you get to meet Zefram Cochrane. It gets the whole ball rolling, right? He launches the Phoenix. The Vulcans check him out. They come do First Contact. and then it's off to the races from there. The Vulcans get involved with Earth, and then you get all of Enterprise. And this is like and then Enterprise goes off and does their thing in Star Trek Enterprise with Captain Archer. They meet the Andorians, they meet the Tellarites, they meet the Xindi. All this stuff happens.
Glad you mentioned that. Well, yeah, I know one of the first freelance projects you gave me was to cover the Enterprise era, and why I was thrilled with that. Some people, newbies coming to watch the show, don't really like Enterprise, and I tell them sit and get through to seasons 3 and season 4, because I fell in love with Andorians in this show. This was the show all about Andorians to me. So if you want to play the raw Andorians, you want to play the raw Tellarites, or if you want to play telepathic Aenir, which is a subset of the Andorians, this could be the time for you. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree, yeah, especially because this is one of the things I'm really excited about, is we know that there's going to be a Aenir or Aenar, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, on Strange New Worlds.
I didn't know that. Spoiler!
Oh, shoot, sorry.
I told you I don't like spoilers. I don't watch.
Oh, shoot, I'm sorry, Michael. Well, just erase that part of your brain. So
now you messed me up, because now I'm wondering, how's that possible? There was only like 1,000 left according to D. Candido's books, and then Chris.
Well, let me switch. Let me move on, and we can forget about it. I really like. Well, let me rephrase. I struggled with Enterprise initially. It took me a couple seasons to get into it, and then season 3 and season 4 were really good. But even beyond the quality of the series, which was hit or miss, honestly, in my opinion, what I love the most about Enterprise is I think it's just about the most gameable era in Star Trek for a group, because like literally, if you think about the Enterprise NX-01, it was out there on its own every week doing things that no human crew had done before. And I love the idea. I mean, even more than the original series, it was pushing the envelope every episode. And it was like, that was just like, everything was so new and different. And like, what a great opportunity for a role-playing group to go out there and do absolutely new stuff every session.
Well, I want to add too, it makes for a great vigilante game, because before Enterprise NX-01 even launched, remember, there was already boomers out there. There were people already exploring and trading and setting up colonies. So if you really want to be free of the Federation, completely free of all that, go ahead and become a boomer. Watch Enterprise. There's some background about what boomers are. Google it. And this would be the era to really be free of the Federation. So good point. All right, we move now on to Federation and Empire. The range is 2200 to 2299. What TV shows and movies are going to educate me about that time period?
Yeah, so this is, if you're looking at the timeline, this is the original series, the animated series, the first two seasons of Discovery, and then all the motion pictures, all the original series motion pictures, Star Trek 1 through Star Trek 6, and then the first chunk of Star Trek Generations, where you got Kirk and Scotty and Chekhov on the Enterprise B, that little 20-minute opening segment bit. This is just, this is where it all started, really, with the original series.
How would you sum up the difference between Enterprise era, which we just talked about, and this era? What do you think is the general different feel for players and game masters, if you were to explain it to them?
Yeah, I think the general vibe would be that the Federation has kind of like established itself. It's formed. It's worked out the growing pains. It's now expanding. It's now becoming, depending on how you want to look at it, it's becoming the colonizers, right? They're out there gathering new worlds, collecting colonies. They're adding new members. They're butting heads with the Klingon Empire, which is out there doing the exact same thing. The Romulans are kind of the mysterious folks behind the neutral zone getting involved, but it's primarily the Klingons and the Romulans. I'm sorry, the Klingons and the Federation. I mean, this is classic 60s Cold War here, right? It's the exactly. Soviet Union.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the Soviet Union and the United States. They're both expanding rapidly, trying to gather up all the resources and butting heads every chance they get.
Yeah, if anybody really wants to sum up and understand the Cold War reference to, not only can you watch the older episodes and any episodes that involve Kirk's crew versus Klingons, but Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country, one of my favorite movies of all time. Go into it realizing it's about America and Russia and the dropping of the Cold Wall. And then you'll be like, whoa, I didn't realize that's what the 60s Star Trek was about, and it was. And another thing I like about this era too that many people miss out on, because you have to tolerate, I personally like the animation, but some people don't want to tolerate 1960s, 1970s animation, is the animated series has a bunch of characters that were never on the original series because they didn't have the makeup and costume for that. But I always wonder what happened to those characters. So I love as a player, if you like the animated series, pick up those characters. I just had Walking Bear and Imres in my most recent game, and the players loved it because I'm like, man, we didn't see that much of them. So that's a great era you could explore. And IDW Publishing, of course, has the comic book about year 5, Star Trek II, which that Modiphius just came out with a new book about. So you could play that era with this too, right? This that era, a lot of good stuff. Very popular era, but I would have to say the most popular era, correct me if I'm wrong, right now would be the Allies and Adversaries era of 2300 to 2379. What TV shows are that, and what's going on in the universe at that time?
Yeah, and that's Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager, and all the Next Gen era movies. This is the one section of the Star Trek franchise, if you're looking at film stuff, that has just the most material. There's what, 714. There's 21 seasons plus movies worth of stuff in this era, and there's just so much material. I mean, that's why we set the default setting for the game in 2371, because there's just so much happening between DS9 and Next Gen and Voyager, disappearing and going off to the Delta Quadrant. There's just so much story here that we couldn't ignore it, because that's where so many people have grown up. I mean, I grew up on reruns of the original series, but like I was just starting college when Next Gen came out, and then I was growing up and becoming who I am, and like DS9 was a huge influence on that, because DS9 really showed me that you can do something different with the Star Trek universe and still have it be Star Trek and relevant. So this section of the chapter is really hitting on everything that happens from the beginning of Next Gen all the way to the end of Nemesis.
Yeah, I think I have to always tell my story. I grew up watching reruns like you because my dad's a diehard TOS fan, and I grew up watching the animated series on repeats. But I still remember the night me and my dad stayed home to watch the premiere on UPN of The Next Generation. And the part that got me was my dad's reaction. Like, we're back, and he thought it was so awesome. But what I remember about it is during the opening credits, when the rumbling starts because the Enterprise comes up from underneath, and my dad saw that people were walking in the windows. He lost it. He just lost it. And I'll never forget that feeling of, this is new, this is fresh. And it was just so classy at the time. Like, Starfleet had matured. It was a clean cut, good organization. It wasn't rough and tumble like Kirk. These were the polished, the best of the best. So if that's what you want to play, is just mankind at its best, I really feel that it's this time period. Don't you think so?
Yeah, and I think you have to, in that respect, like at this point, like the Federation is so established, and so there's like 150 member worlds or whatever. But like, if you think of Patrick Stewart playing Picard, as like he's like the embodiment of everything that you want a Starfleet captain to be, very measured, very diplomatic. He's got the very homogenous crew working together, solving problems together, and it's just like that's just classic. Not classic Trek, but it's just like the archetypes right there for you.
Yeah, and I'll go with that. Remember, Patrick Stewart is a Shakespearean level actor.
Sure.
Likewise, Kate Mulgrew. The actors of this time were coming off of stage and coming into Star Trek, and they brought this decorum with them that reflects this era. It's not like Kirk getting into brawls and kind of drinking whiskey on deck and stuff like that. This was a whole different type. And I tell my nieces and nephews when they're watching it, I said, first of all, forget that it's a TV show and view it as a stage play, because they love stage plays. Hamilton's brought stage plays back for this generation. I'm like, look at it like a stage play, and you won't expect all the flash. You'll watch the story, and that's what gets them into these. So if that's your favorite era, which is my favorite area, era, then this would be the section. All right, but then of course, as humans tend to do, things start breaking apart. So we move on. We move on into post-war and Reconstruction, 2380 to 2399. Talk to us about the shows and what the feel is of this generation.
Yeah, and so for the longest time, this era, like post Nemesis, there was really nothing other than the novels, right? The novels eventually went into 2380 and beyond, and so you could use the novels as kind of a basis for like what was happening. But once Picard came out, Picard was set in 2399, and finally we got some sort of story that took place after Nemesis. Like what happens next? And they jumped it ahead 20 years, but now Lower Decks is out, and now Lower Decks is starting to kind of like fill in that space as well. Although so far, we just finished watching season 2 of Lower Decks. They're not really carrying the geopolitical feel like Next Gen and DS9 really, especially DS9, right? Of course, with the Dominion War, really changed the political landscape of the Alpha and Beta quadrants, and we've never really seen the fallout of that. But so what Lower Decks is showing us is that there doesn't seem to have been much of a fallout. Everything kind of went back to normal because we haven't seen the Romulans yet. We've kind of seen they kind of hinted at something going on here with the Klingons and the Pakleds at the end of season 2. No spoilers or anything, but I'm curious to see where they go with that in season 3.
Yeah, they might keep it lighthearted. They might, really. And you mentioned Lower Decks and Picard. They're on two ends of the spectrum. Where one's very lighthearted, and the other one, Picard, is really, you're starting to see what's happening in Star Trek has always reflected what's going on in society. Mm-hmm. And in Picard, you're starting to see the skepticism and cynicism about organized structure and what the Federation is about, and how slow it takes bureaucracy to move to do good. And so people taking vigilante and rogue. This is now my second favorite time period in Star Trek. I'm really enjoying 2399 about what it's going to be. So if you are looking for more anti-establishment type of gaming, this might be the era for you and your team, right?
Yeah. And I'd also add that Star Trek Picard is kind of a first for Star Trek in that it's telling, like, there's a lot of stuff going on, but at its heart is a very, very personal story. And I think as a game master and as a player, like getting back to the role-playing game, this is an opportunity for you to do a different kind of storytelling in the Star Trek setting that isn't necessarily, going off and exploring strange new worlds and having adventures and stuff. You could if you got a good, strong, mature group of players and you want to tell some really hard, stuff, Picard is a good model for that, because you're taking a character that's beloved and has been around for 30 odd years, and you're kind of deconstructing him literally and figuratively. And like, as a gamer, I'd be scared, but I would love to do something like that as a player. Like, as a game master, it'd be really hard. I would need the right group of players to want to do that and explore it with. But like, that could be like a gold mine of RP opportunity to do something like that.
Well, to your point, let me just give an example for new game masters, people who are maybe familiar with Star Trek, Voyager or TNG, DS9, and are coming into the game. A good launch, if you I don't want to get muddled up in the Federation and the politics, but I want to play the game, you could pick up one of my favorite episodes from Voyager season 1 about the Sicarians. The Sicarians had this amazing transporter technology. They would not give it to Janeway and her crew on Voyager. That the show moves on from them, and you don't hear about them again until 2399, when you find out the Borg assimilated some of their technology. So that world fell to the Borg, but it's never been seen on TV. Maybe you want to make your people a bunch of rogue Sicarians, the last survivors of the Delta Quadrant, as a story. So you could use this time period to say, whatever happened to Where Are They Now? This would be a great setting for Where Are They Now stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Then we move to this weird, obscure time period, which of course time travel always is. It's the temporal Cold War that lands somewhere within the 27th century and other time frames. Where did we pull this era from?
Yeah, and this one's a little tricky because you would kind of have to read some of the novels, and you'd have to watch Star Trek Enterprise and like fairly carefully, tease out the references that they make to the temporal Cold War, because like it's certainly a factor with Archer and the and the future guy or future person, whatever. So like there was clearly in the 27th century a time war that involved people going back in time to try to change things, and people going forward in time, and people trying to like police that and like try to keep people from changing all the divergent timelines that are out there. So there is some information in the book. There's not really a huge amount of canon information about this. I know they touch on it in the Coda books, right? Like the first book, especially. There's a lot of stuff with.
I was about to say, if you want to know why you needed the temporal accords, I feel like that's what Coda is about. Is why you need the temporal accords, and I'm loving it.
Interesting, yeah,
it's really cool. To that point too, this is if you're going to play in the temporal Cold War, you're not restricted to the 27th century. You could be on a specialized Federation ship traveling to Renaissance times in order to capture aliens who are trying to manipulate humanity thousands of years ago or anywhere. So this is, to me, the biggest freeform part. If you want if you have a bunch of gamers and players who are like, we just want to have this type of game. Okay, you know what? Then we're going to say you're something to do with temporal investigations or something, right?
Yeah, and not to cross the streams necessarily here, but like if anybody's out there has seen Loki, the TV series Loki, and and you want to play like a Department of Temporal Investigations or what was it, the TVA, right, in Loki. If you want to play like a Federation agent who's responsible for keeping the timeline intact, this is a great time to do it, right? Because you just take your device and you go troubleshoot time disturbances, and like you can berate Kirk or you can berate Picard, or like whoever's screwing up the timeline, go back in time and fix it, and then go back to your desk job and file the paperwork.
Let's make a Bakula reference for all you Quantum Leap fans. You can do that too. You Quantum Leap all day. Yeah, so fun era to play in. Time travel can be complicated, but I know a lot of RPG groups love stuff like that, including other dimensions and things that you can play with this. And finally, we get to the last era we've seen on TV. Talk to us about the 32nd century.
Yeah, and this one we've only got one season worth of stuff so far, but we got season 4 coming up here pretty soon. So Discovery season 3, they went into a bold new direction. They jumped 900 years ahead in like what we know of Star Trek canon, and they went into the 3100s, and the Discovery got an upgrade to 32nd century technology, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff happening. The Federation is still in existence, but it's completely different now because it's such a shadow of its former self, and that probably ties into what you were saying about Picard, like how it started to kind of deconstruct the Federation and like show you how hard it is to maintain it, and you start to distrust society, and you distrust things, and then like in the 32nd century we see that it fell apart eventually, and but they're still trying to keep it together. There's like a core of Starfleet still trying to keep it together and still trying to do the noble idealistic Starfleet thing, and Discovery gets caught up in that. And so we've seen one season worth of stuff that could be really cool for this setting, and as far as I know, season 4 will continue that in the same era. And that's an opportunity for game masters who aren't familiar with the 55 years of stuff behind us. You've only got one season worth of stuff to worry about, and then you can do whatever you want.
well, I'm going to do even more stream mixing in a weird way, because if you wanted to, remember Dune, which is another Modiphius property, and it's a popular movie right now, is set tens of thousands of years in the future. And who's to say that one of the offshoots of the Federation, that these are what the human colonists didn't end up becoming? So you can get really creative with the future, and mix a little Star Trek with a little bit of Dune, get two real good properties together. You get a lot of satisfaction if your players want a variety of types of games.
Sure.
That's how creative you can get with Star Trek Adventures, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, Star Trek, anything is possible, right? Throw a little technobabble at it, and anything's possible. I mean, heck, if you really wanted to, like, I don't know how, this might be too extreme. Like, I think Dune plus Star Trek would be pretty amazing. But like, if you're into like, I don't know, like Warhammer, or like Warhammer 40K, I mean, sure, why not have the Federation kind of like bump heads with the Empire, and it'd be crazy and wild, but I mean, really, seriously, you could pull anything into Star Trek and find a way to make it work, and it would be, it'd be cool.
That's the fun of RPG. I don't know if you saw it, but they had a Avengers in-game YouTube thing where the scene where, Doc Strange starts calling all the heroes, and he starts calling all the heroes. He even calls like Rambo and Sigourney Weaver from Alien and Back to the Future and Ghostbusters.
Sure.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
It was hilarious. And I was like, I was like, I wish I could see this movie. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So, wow, Jim, we've only talked about half of the section of chapter 3 so far.
It's a lot.
Yeah. There's so much gold there. And now we're going to go to some more gold about styles of play. Okay, I have to admit, I like this chapter a little bit because I wrote a lot of it along with Fred Love, this section. Talk to us about the purpose of the styles of play section.
Yeah, so like if you're a game master in a group of players and you're thinking about Star Trek and like what kind of a game do you want to play, what kind of campaign do you want to run, you got a couple overlays you need to think about. Like one overlay is like, what polity are you? Are you Starfleet? Are you the Klingon Empire? Are you the Romulans? Like what militaristic body are you playing, right? So that's one layer to think about, because that's going to influence what ships you have and what you're doing and like some of the tone of your game. Next is to figure out your timeline. That's a layer that you're adding on, like what era of play are you playing in? We just talked about that. And then next is like, what style of play do you want to play? Because like there's so many different ways you can play the game. And so this chapter is really kind of like taking, I think we broke it down into 8 distinct.
Yeah, let's go over the highlights. Yeah.
So this is just another overlay to think about. And the first one, I'll just jump into it here, is the Admiralty style of play. And we touched on this in the command source book. And what this is like, so sure, everybody can be, captain and crew on one ship doing your thing, but you can take it up a level and say, okay, instead of everybody playing officers on a ship, you're all playing captains. Like, or maybe someone's playing an admiral, and then everyone else is playing a captain under that admiral. So instead of controlling one character, you're controlling an entire ship. And that just changes the scope of your storytelling, so that instead of just talking about one ship, you're talking about maybe a whole sector of space or maybe a whole region of space, where the scope of it's just gotten bigger as far as the stuff that you're responsible for.
This chapter reminded me of players who maybe are big into the video gaming of Star Trek and fleets, battles and stuff like that this might be the level of campaign they want if they want to take Risk or Starfleet, the fleet battles into the gaming thing. You can use the rules and still achieve it, but in an RPG format. I've always found video games very restricting because I have to follow the rules, and that's not how I live my life. Generally, I try to find new and creative ways to do things. And so I feel that at an Admiralty campaign, you're playing the people who make the rules now. And I think that's kind of cool with that one. All right, so that's one style of play. Before we move on, I want to focus that part of this chapter also focuses on the style of campaign in the way of whether you're going to make it episodic or whether you're going to make it cinematic. So maybe there's just one, in a movie it would end up 2 hours, but in the gaming, it could be 3 weeks of play that end up in a movie. So what did you think about that? Why did you want to highlight that difference for new players?
Did we highlight that here, or is that I think that's in a future chapter, isn't it, where we talk about maybe not, maybe it's here too, but
page 72 talks about it. One of the things I noticed, maybe the reason why it was highlighted here is because it talks about casting the right villain. So unlike a TV shows who are episodic and have different characters each week, for a cinema, you really need to cast the right villain. And I thought that was a really cool idea, right?
Yeah. So I got it. I didn't catch your segue into the next style of play, but yeah. So the next style of play that we talked about is like looking at the movies, right? So like you take the great example is the original series, right? So they took the original series crew, and then they translated them to the silver screen. But in the process of doing so, you have to amp everything up, right? You have to bring more action and drama and pathos to the story, so that it's not quite so small and intimate on the TV screen. It's just bigger on the big screen. And so we provided some guidance of like, how do you do that? And like exactly what you were saying, you need a memorable villain / antagonist to be really interesting. And I think Khan is probably the single best example of that. He's such a bigger than life villain for Kirk to butt heads with.
And again, I want to make the comparison. So for people who want to transfer their video gaming skills over to this is a better setting for the big boss. Like a series of events until you finally get to the big boss. If
Right.
you want to play that kind of game where there's minor villains, minor obstacles, and then finally get to the big boss, that's more cinematic style. And video games are based off cinematic style many times because of that. So this is a cool style of play. You could read this chapter to get understanding about how to do that if you like that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, then we talked about season-long story arcs. What would you compare that to if there was a TV show that you had to make a comparison for a season-long story arc?
My best example would be DS9. I think especially the first 3 episodes of the second season were a very tight, contained arc, but then you get into the Dominion War, and then like the last 9 episodes of the last season were one huge long story that you can do. But even Discovery does this really well. And Enterprise, season 3 of Enterprise, primarily where it's all of the expanse and the sphere builders and the Xindi and all that stuff. Let's all.
Not forget to mention the Shackleton Expanse campaign guide, because that is a campaign story arc.
Right? I was trying not to be too much of a plugger here, but yeah, absolutely. The Shackleton Expanse campaign guide that came out not too long ago, that tells an epic story that could be one season, it could be multiple seasons, but
right. Yeah. Again, I didn't write it. I'm only plugging it because people oftentimes want a picture of like, well, how do I build an interconnecting story with different modules and different episodes that end up at a certain point? That is the model of how to do it in that guide. So that would explain what a season-long story arc could look like. So then what we do is we divert into the more episodic shows, which have always been my favorite. I love episodic. I love walking away after 42 minutes and being just gratified from beginning to ending, wrap up the story, can go anywhere in the canon. And we started there. I wrote these chapters, so I don't know, I wanted to get your take on it. Talk about close to home political campaigns in core worlds. How does that differentiate from other type of shows that you may watch? I can't ask a question again because I'm so
I feel like I should be asking you the question since
you asked me the questions. Let's flip it. Go ahead.
Yeah, flip it. So
you've never talked about it outside of this.
Was it you or Fred who wrote this one? It was you, wasn't it?
I wrote this. I think this to the end of the chapter. Yep.
Yeah. So what was your model for the close to home campaigns there, Michael?
Sure. So that would have been the next generation. So the next generation, that means that the ship is flying within the center of the Federation. You could be going from this planet one day to deliver supplies to a rescue mission the next day to courting an ambassador back on planet Earth in the next week. And so this was really about you're in that clean cut Picard level world of anything could happen. A lot of family, a lot of friends, people you used to go to the academy with, Risa pleasure planets, things like that. This is this setting here, which most people are familiar with the next generation.
Yep, and I'll add all great stuff. I'll add that like for those fans and gamers and players who are really familiar with next gen DS9, like playing a close to home game means it's going to feel familiar, right? You're going to have all the alien species that you saw on screen are going to be available to you. Like you got the Klingons, you got the Romulans, you got the Cardassians, you've got Ferengi. Like you got familiar guest stars that you can drop into your campaigns and into your episodes. You don't have to, like as a game master, you don't necessarily have to work real hard to create new species or new situations or new aliens. You can just just drop them right into what is familiar and go with it. I want to add one more thing, Michael, and that's you can get really political with this because you are in the Alpha and Beta quadrant and you're in all this familiar stuff. And again, Next Gen is a great model for that because Picard, even as clean cut as he was, he became the arbiter of succession for the Klingon Empire. And that had a huge ramifications for the whole franchise all the way through DS9, where, Worf finally, killed Gowron. And gave the chancellorship over to Martok, right? So that the fact that Picard was a key component of that is something that you could use as a model for your game group. And like if your captain wanted to do something that monumental too, there's an opportunity to do that. There's precedent for it, right? So you could, because you're playing a close to home game, and you're able to interact with all these well-known species and worlds and stuff. That's just an opportunity to really dig down into it.
Yep, and again, it's a very also, if you're playing a more humorous, lighthearted game, Lower Decks would be right in here. They're making Second Contact, which I think is totally hilarious. So after the hard work is done by Picard and his crew, you're the cleanup crew. So again, you could have a "Where are they now?" type of mission with this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Are you still going to flip it on me for a while?
Yeah, sure. So I think because you wrote deep space exploration missions too, didn't you?
I did. And again, this would be similar to Star Trek Enterprise, because again, you're on your own. Jim already talked about that, or Star Trek, the original series. And these are ones. Now, one of the funnest parts I had writing this, Jim, was it starts on page 80, and it's page 80 and 81. But I had to close my eyes and think, okay, there's nothing ahead of you. You have no support. Starfleet's behind you. And I'm just trailblazing like Stanley and Livingston years ago, and you don't know what you're going to hit and what's that like. And on page 80 and 81, I had so much fun talking about how sensors on a starship work as you start from long range and you get closer. But what really got me, I really extrapolated close range tasks, because I was like, okay, what's it like on the ship once you get into a new star system and there's 4 planetoids and some asteroid belts? What does everyone do? You don't see this a lot in Star Trek, but what about, all the shuttles probably take off. People start saying scientists are vying for resources and shuttles and equipment and personnel. And inside that ship must be so exciting as all these scientists come back to the ship and just start studying what they find and cataloging it before they move on deeper into space. Yeah. And then occasionally you end up at a star system and there's a new life form. And that just creates a whole new hubbub. Are they sentient? Are they not? And this really excited me. If you're into that type of gaming, this explains what it's like to have a deep space game.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this then, Michael, given all of that, and I am pretty sure of the timeline. I think you wrote this chapter before you read the Shackleton Expanse campaign guide. Yes. So having written this and knowing what you know about deep space exploration games, how would you apply all of this great stuff to taking the Shackleton Expanse, which is literally a deep space exploration game, right? Yeah. I mean, that is it to a T. So tell me a little bit how in your game master brain, because I know you've been thinking about this a lot. I just want you to share it with the audience. How would you take these concepts that you wrote in the Game Master Guide and apply it to running something like the Shackleton Expanse?
Sure. So right away, when you asked me that question, the first thing I envisioned is from the Shackleton Expanse Guide, the map that was done. There was a map of the Shackleton Expanse. And right away, I thought, okay, my crew's out there by themselves. Where are they starting? What direction are they heading? And what are they hitting on the way there? And that's where then, as we go in those directions and we see different planetary bodies, different star systems, I then take those modules from the Shackleton Expanse and say, okay, this is when they're meeting them. This is when they're meeting them. And I kind of lay it out mentally like that. Mm-hmm. And so you could do that. You could pick any of the modules, or if you're creating your own stories, get a star map. Go get, I have that star map from Star Trek over here with the whole galaxy, and there's areas of unexplored. And it's so fun when you get with your players and you lay it out and say, what direction do you want to go in? And then you just take all the modules, the ones produced from Modiphius.net or mission briefs, and just lay them out. And that's what they're going to discover. Some people even, I've seen some game masters give a grid of the star system, and they let the player, they plant the adventures. They don't tell them what they are. And depending on the player's random selection of where to go, that's the adventure they're going to end up playing. And I think that's kind of cool too. That emulates that deep space exploration feel.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. All right. So then, and just continue the theme here. I think you wrote Far From Home, right? That's the next.
I did.
Yeah. So tell us about what's your model here for Far From Home games.
Near and dear to my heart, this is Star Trek Voyager. This is, you thought you had backup and now you're on your own. And now you have to make ethical choices about the kind of people you and your crew are. You no longer have the Federation's protection or backing. Are you still a believer in the Prime Directive, or are you going to go rogue? And this one is the most tragic one. This one breaks my heart because like we saw in Star Trek Voyager, you get down to the raw of each and every human on that crew, or not human, excuse me, each and every creature on that crew. And I talked about there's different types of getting lost and far from home. You can be lost in space, lost in time, or put into other realities like we saw in Star Trek Discovery, the mirror universe. And I think my favorite thing about, again, the Far From Home games is it really calls in the ethics, morality, and belief systems of a crew. Mm-hmm. This is tough. It's a really tough place to be. And the game that I play, we're actually 13.7 million light years away in the Centaurus A galaxy. So I said, I'm pushing it even further. I'm taking it to another galaxy. And I have to say, it's been the most rewarding GMing experience of my life. And the players, I'm blessed with some of the best players. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And I'll just give you an anecdote. When I was reading the manuscript that you sent in for this, I was really touched by this chapter, or this section of the chapter, because I didn't love Voyager, and that was only because I thought it was a great concept that the episodic format of television at the time didn't do it justice, because the ship was pristine and new literally every episode. Yeah. And I was like, how could this possibly? I wanted it to be more like Battlestar Galactica, where you see the wear and tear episode after episode. You see the people getting worn down by this journey. And it was just like, oh no, we're Starfleet. Everything's copacetic week after week after week. But there was a section in this chapter that you wrote that made me think twice about it. And I was like, wow, you are literally, in the case of Voyager, 70,000 light years away from home. It's going to take you a generation to get back home under normal circumstances. And so, like, how does that mean for your crew? Like, does your captain rule with an iron fist and force you to stay in the Starfleet ideals? Do you become a generational ship? Do you, what do you think about the Prime Directive? Like, do you just throw it to the wind and just like do your own thing? Like you asked some great questions in this thing that, like, as a game master, I was like, oh, maybe I should think about playing a Far From Home game where like everything is everything is off the table and you can do whatever the heck you want, and and leave it up to the crew and the players to be like, do you want to stay Starfleet? Or do you want to just go rogue and be like independents, taking full advantage of the resources at your disposal? Like, there's just so many questions here that you can answer.
Well, and like you said, that's one of the reasons I fell in with Janeway, because it was episodic in nature. You could never get really deep into her character. They had limited time every week. But the kind of person she had to be, which we now know from Star Trek Prodigy, she's one of the most decorated Starfleet captains. Yeah. The kind of person you need to be to get through that. There's other popular captains that I honestly don't think would have made the same decisions and stuck with Starfleet. Kirk would never have done it. Sorry, Kirk would have, no, he would have colonized the planet or something. But that's why this was definitely in both the Game Master's Guide and the Player's Guide, this is my favorite piece to write.
Nice. All right, so let's move on to the next one here. Spice of Life games. Talk to us about Spice of Life.
Sure. So Spice of Life is not too different from playing within the Federation area. Actually, you know what? I'm going to correct myself just in case I'm wrong. The close to home political campaigns and core worlds, I just got it mixed up. I think that was Fred who wrote that, and I just talked about it. So I love giving credit where credit's due.
That's fair.
Factions and politics. So he, I think, wrote the part on factions and politics, which I confused with Spice of Life games because it's everything I already said. People close, people that's what that was. So I'm not going to repeat myself. And sorry about that, Fred.
Hopefully he'll forgive us.
And he wrote the next part too, just so we know. So let's talk about station-based games. I'll go ahead and take the questioning back. So what's the big difference between being in a ship and being in a station, Jim?
Yeah, and this is this harkens again. DS9 is my favorite series by far. I got the T-shirt on today, of course. It was such a different approach to Star Trek storytelling. So, like, instead of the ship going off to a new planet, dealing with the planet, and then warping away at the end, and you're like, oh, whatever problems we had to deal with, they got left behind. We'll never see them again. Episode of the week, right? But for DS9, it's like, wait a minute, your problems don't go away. They're still there. Right, you're still living with these people, right? Like the adventure comes to you, and so like Sisko, and you think of all the characters on DS9, like they had the same things I mean, not that they were faced, they had to make decisions, and then those decisions had repercussions week after week after week because they couldn't escape it, right? They couldn't, I mean, not that they couldn't.
It was Gilligan's Island, man. It was Fantasy Island. It was Love Boat.
Yeah, it was, or it was a, you know, instead of Wagon Train to the Stars, you know, for Star Trek, this was, you know, you're in a Western town and like you just live there, and it's like Deadwood, right? It's people are coming into the town and you're dealing with it. You're the marshal, or you're the doctor, or you're the constable, or whatever, and you're just dealing with all these new faces that show up week after week, and then the choices that you make have consequences, right? And it changes the feel of the town, right? Like you know, a key character dies, and then everyone's got to deal with that the repercussions of that. You just can't escape it, and it is a great way to tell Star Trek stories from a different perspective, right? And I
want to say this is a good time to mention that, remember, you don't have to dedicate your group to playing just one of these types before you get to the very last piece. You could all of a sudden dock your people at a space station for a retrofit for 3 to 4 months of game time and see how they deal with that, you know. And station games also applies to being stuck in a colony on a planet or a mining asteroid, right? It can be flexible to all that.
Yeah, and you know, the station doesn't have to be in space, right? Like one of the Star Trek campaigns I ran ages ago, my co-GM and I wanted to do something different. We wanted to really shake it up, and of course we were both inspired by DS9, and we were like, well, how about we do a Star Trek game based on a planet, right? So why don't we create a station like a scientific outpost that's on a planet, and the planet itself has a whole bunch of interesting, crazy stuff going on, in addition to all the other things that are happening in orbit or in the sector or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it was different because it was like, it wasn't DS9, right? It was something a little different on the planet, and we got to get like the weather. There was like weird weather things that were happening, and there were weird alien creatures on the planet that we got to get involved with, and it was just a fun, different way to tell Star Trek stories in a different environment than we were used to seeing on screen. So it's just an opportunity to do something different.
Yeah, back in the day, me and my dad, when we were watching Deep Space Nine, dreamed that somehow Deep Space Nine would end up in the wormhole, and that would be where the station ends up in the show. We dreamt about that. That would have been so cool.
Nice.
All right, cool. Finally, the last piece I did right. This last section I did right.
Yep. So unsanctioned missions. Talk to us about. I can guess where you're going with this, but tell me all about what your thoughts are on running a unsanctioned mission type of story time.
Well, you know, I wrote it in the first intro paragraph. I'll just read it. The crew of the Enterprise, led by James Kirk, defies Starfleet orders, busts out of space dock, and returns to the Genesis planet to rescue Spock. Or Worf resigns his Starfleet commission to join the Klingon Defense Force. Or Jean-Luc Picard assembles a ragtag band to unravel the mystery of the Zhat Vash. So these are all the rule breakers, or maybe it's people who never joined Starfleet because they don't believe in the mission and they're running vigilante runs. Maybe they're the drug runners, if you want to play that kind of game. Maybe they have illegal tech. Maybe they're out there, you know, mad at the bureaucracy because it moves too slow, and they got some people, powerful connections, and they can blow stuff up too, and always run under the radar. So I really wrote this inspired by Picard, that's for sure. I'm also happy to see that this could also be included with like Star Trek Prodigy, because they're not Starfleet. We don't know what they're going to do with that. But this is really for the players too, who just want to be like, forget it, I'm doing what I want to do. I have a bunch of Han Solo types, sorry to borrow from another franchise, who want to play a game, pew pew kind of game. That's what I wrote that for.
Yep. And I would add that you could also easily do a Maquis type of campaign in this kind of milieu. And then I guess as long as we're shamelessly plugging other products, I want to make sure that folks know that like the Player's Guide is really going to, and I'm not trying to, you know, sensationalize it, but I think the Player's Guide, the content of the Player's Guide is going to blow the doors off of what you can do in Star Trek Adventures simply by the fact that we're adding character roles for non-Starfleet, non-Klingon species. So like if you wanted to play any type of character that goes into that Han Solo spirit, or or even like what we see on DS9 and Voyager, where you've got Bajoran militia and unaligned militia, and you've got a tailor, you've got a bartender, you've got religious figures, you've got Neelix, independent merchant, independent trader, whatever. All these different character types that you see on Star Trek that are not Starfleet or not Klingon. You can create that ragtag group of misfits, like a civilian doctor, whatever.
Yeah, and they need a motivation
together.
Yeah, and they need a motivation. So I remember when I was writing this chapter, I was like, well, what's going to motivate someone to leave the creature comforts of the Federation to go live on the outskirts, the fringes? And so some of the things I put, maybe, you owe someone a debt. You're a vigilante. I mentioned some of the illegal activities you may be part of, or maybe it's espionage. Maybe you are Federation, but they've tucked you away to break down like a criminal ring or something. Maybe you're working for Section 31. And then I ended up thinking like, okay, you're on your own. Where do you get resources from? And so there's guidance about you better establish some contacts. You better figure out how to get some starships if you don't own one. And then weapons and technology would be a huge part. So I put some guidance in there so you could build the campaign and maybe make it logical of how you're working in this huge universe.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think when I was reading your section here, because I was editing the player's guide at the same time, I was just really excited at seeing this, the unsanctioned missions concept, coupled with all the new player options we were providing in the player's guide, and just imagining like, what is the Star Trek Adventures game core out there in the world going to do with this once they get their hands on it? Because like literally, if somebody wanted to do like Firefly in the Star Trek setting, or really Traveler, or any science fiction property out there, if you wanted to adapt that and put it into the Star Trek setting, you have the tools to do it now, which is so cool. I can't wait to see what people do with it.
I would love to see people, we talk about Session Zero. Imagine if people's Session Zero was an entire season where they are ragtag until they get brought into Starfleet for some impetus. And now you have a Maquis kind of view back onto Voyager, So there's a lot of ways you could really, man, me and you were writers. We could piece out every type and make an epic, TV show. And again, that was the point as we're talking about Chapter 3, eras of play. What time do you want your people in, or all over time? And styles of play. There's a wealth of information in these 2 chapters. I think this is probably going to be 2 sections. I think this is probably one of my favorite chapters to share with people too, when I'm introducing them to the game.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So that's where we are. Jim, remind people if they have questions, how to get in contact with you and where they can find the products if they want to start playing Star Trek Adventures today.
Yeah, sure thing. So if you want to check out any of these products, head over to Modiphius.net or Modiphius.us, depending on where you are in the world. Of course, buy from your friendly local game store. Modiphius respects the brick and mortars program, so no matter where you buy the physical products, reach out to support at Modiphius, and they'll get you hooked up with the PDFs of all the physical products for free. You can reach me at email at jim@modiphius.com, or you can find me on social media for this game everywhere: Twitter, Reddit, Discord, Facebook groups, whatever. I'm not hard to find. Especially if you're into Star Trek Adventures, you can find me. Send me questions, and we'll answer the questions here on the show if we can. And if not, we'll try to answer them one way or another. But that's where to reach me. And Michael, how about you? Where can they find you?
I'm on Continuing Missions, of course. You can find me there, but I'm also on the Facebook, Reddit, Discord groups. My code name is Game Masters usually, or Michael Dismuke. Just look for that. You'll find me there. Always happy to talk Star Trek Adventures. Did we want to plug your favorite game shop?
My favorite game store closed about 6 years ago. So pour one out for the Game Parlor in Chantilly, Virginia. They were my favorite place for years and years and years. I just, by virtue of where I am right now, I don't have a local game store, friendly or otherwise. So I do most of my game ordering online now. So I'll be looking for one, but hope springs eternal that a new one opens up someday.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and post on Facebook for people to shout out their latest game shops and future episodes so that we can give love to the brick and mortar that have been supporting RPGs for decades.
Absolutely.
All right, Jim, another awesome continuing conversations. We'll see you next time when we talk about Chapter 4 of the Game Master's Guide, which focuses on society, technology, and service protocols. Wait.
No, that's chapter. We did that one.
I'm gonna do an edit real quick. Hold on one second.
Chapter 2.
Give me a pause.
We're doing chapter 4 next.
Give me a pause so I can edit. So Jim, thank you so much. Another excellent episode of Continuing Conversations. We'll talk to you all when we cover the chapter about To Boldly Go. It's chapter 4. It's about how to prepare for your game, recruit a crew, your first voyage, and how to run the game. This is a special for Game Masters. See you then.